My initial interest, like in stepping into the classroom, is one, like acknowledging that like these kids are humans, that come from different histories, different backgrounds. Some of them have trauma, some of them have abuse in their background, some of them don't, some of them have wonderful parents, some of them, like there's a diverse, like within every class of 30 to 35, like there's this diverse plethora of backgrounds, and like starting to focus on health, like personal health, mental health, before I start focusing on you need to learn this, or we need to get you to write this, or stuff like that. Like really investing in them as humans. Yeah, I get the idea of like technological, like focusing on things. But if we think that taking away expression through art or anything like that is going to make for a better coder, how is that true? Like, if we think about the invention of code and the people that are making these programs, they're extremely, like, diverse in the ways in which they think. And so if we just feed them into, hey, here's coding, here's, HTML and Java and all of that shit, and we don't, like, foster, like, a love of self, a love of creation. If you don't have a love of self, how are you proud of any of your creations?
First of all, I think that they don't have to be mutually exclusive.
No.
Right? Like, you can definitely incorporate coding, the technological knowledge and all of that, and use it as maybe an additional way. It's another outlet for them to show their creativity. Because there is definitely creativity in that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying there's a ton of creativity in it. But we're not doing that. Like, we're teaching coders, right? Like, I've been to coding classrooms, like, and that's great, right?
I've never been to a coding classroom.
You haven't?
What does it look like?
It's literally just a bunch of kids on the computer. The one that I visited was predominantly like computer taught. I get that we're going towards online classes, and it was more like there was like one teacher that like somewhat facilitated, but that it was a like predominantly computer taught course, which is fine. Like, it was a summer course, so I don't know if that's the way it generally is.
So then what does digital literacy mean?
I guess like if I was focusing on digital literacy, or if I was gonna, let's say, like create a class around digital literacy, it would be like it would be focused on students' abilities to step into that platform. So again, let's say the internet, to step into that platform and then be able to interact in that platform and start to understand and learn from it, right? So like in any given app, like there are general norms, let's say, right? There's general ways of doing things. And I can't even think of them because they've become so normed to me. Like, I get in an app and I'm like, oh, it probably does this because most apps do this, right? And that's built that way so that there's less time that I have to spend learning that app, right? So if we can break down those ideas. So for me, it would be starting to expose those norms, right? As far as, let's say, again, I'm using the internet as the example, like expose the norms of the internet that like when you go into a page, like there's an X in the corner. Well, that means you can exit out of the thing, or, there's a tab here, and that means you can probably click on that. Or if there's like certain platforms that we're looking at, like, how do you interpret those platforms? How do you start to understand those things and bring them into your own personal knowledge, right? Like, that's, I guess, how I'd look at digital literacy. I actually hadn't thought a lot about that.
How would you incorporate those ideas into a social studies class?
I feel like our class, like our school's done a lot of really good things. I feel like this is one area where it's like it has a gap. And understanding there are always going to be gaps in programs, so I'm not blaming the program, but this is a gap, right? Because I feel like we haven't done a lot on the ways in which to incorporate technology into our classrooms. So, like, I now have to do research, like, how to do that, because I think there's tons of tools out there with tons of uses. Like, there's so much potential because it's being created so quickly. But it's being created so quickly that, like, we're not getting the information. Like, I don't know where to go specifically for social studies as, like, online, right, as, like, a resource. But I know that there are tons of resources online, and our teacher, Jared, he has introduced us to some of them, and, such as, like, primary sources that are online about U.S. history. Like, that's extremely useful because a lot of what our standards sit around are, like, how to interpret sources and how to find validity in things and how to use sources in creating papers and things like that. So that's like a really useful, but there has to be more. Like, it's like one of those things where there's so much that you're just like, okay, where do I even start? Like, where do I go? Do I just look up social studies and internet? Like, what the, what the heck do I, like, where do I start? So I think that's going to be the difficult thing. Like, I definitely want to incorporate it, especially if my school provides the resources, right? So like the school I'm currently at, not all classes, but some classes have like those MacBook things, not MacBook, Chromebooks, right? So you have access to that. If I have that access, then that's great. But yeah, I honestly don't know. I have no idea because I just haven't had any training. Like, I'm just going to have to go figure it out. Like, I'm going to have to go find cool stuff and like bring it into the classroom. And I'm going to have to find a way to create my own literacy in those things, because I'm sure that there's certain apps or certain programs that like I'm gonna have to learn about and figure out how to use before I say, hey kids, like, or maybe they'll be more apt at, like, maybe I'll be like all fumbling with it. I'm the old person in the classroom and they'll just like kill it. They'll just like, I'll just put it in front, they'll be like, yeah, I don't know. So yeah.
So do you think kids now are automatically just going to be more digitally literate?
I think it depends on what school you're teaching at, right? Like with phones, yes. My students know far more about the apps and stuff on the phone than I do. Absolutely, 100%. But when it comes to like computers, some of them don't have access to computers. Like some of my students have very limited access to computers. So I think you have to take into account like the students you're teaching and their accessibility to the resources that they need to be able to have that, to accrue that type of knowledge. Like in some schools, yeah, like you'll step into a school and the students are they've been on a computer since they were, since they could click the button. So I think you just have to, like I was saying in the earlier thing, like you have to know your students. Like you have to invest in them and know them as humans before stepping, because otherwise you'll take steps. I think that was like my first semester of teaching. Like I would make like cognitive or even like, I guess mostly cognitive, like jumps. And the students would be like, I don't know how you got there. I'm like, no, you just, and then recognizing like, oh, like it's become so normalized for me and so automatic for me that I didn't even see it, and I just like made this jump and had this expectations that the students, I think the same thing has to be done as far as anything, right? Technology, ability to write, ability to public speak, ability to read, like you have to know all of these things so that you don't make those jumps and then like students feel like shit when you're like, oh, so I need you to get on the computer and I need you to write, this 5-page essay and I need you to use this resource and that resource and that resource and bring those in and put sources. Yeah, my students aren't gonna, some of my students didn't have that ability, not yet, and by the end of the year, like they were getting into it, but you have to, yeah.
You got to teach them.
You got to be a teacher. What? Is that what I'm there for?